Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. This is going to be a discussion video on the quote-unquote Nick era of Power Rangers, since it will likely be coming to a close soon with the news, the news/rumor that Dino Fury Season 2 will be on Netflix, and we will be ending our tenure on Nick with Dino Fury. I wanted to do kind of a retrospective on the good and the bad and the mixed Power Rangers run on Nickelodeon since Samurai through now. I want to remind you guys to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more Power Rangers content like this and more. And before we get started, I just want to take a minute to thank the sponsor for today's video. Why go Ridge Wallet? Just because! Like I said, guys, I wanted to take a minute to thank today's sponsor for this video, which is Ridge Wallet, who is known for the sleek, modern take on the wallet, which really cuts down on that unnecessary bulk, and also keeps you protected with RFID protection. As I've said before, I wouldn't do these sponsors if it's not something I use myself, and this is currently what I use for my personal wallet. However, that's not all they offer. As I've mentioned before, they also do really cool stuff like knives, and they have hats, and they have door openers, but also, what's this? It's a backpack. This is their waterproof backpack they were kind enough to send me, and I really dig it a lot because obviously it's waterproof, which is actually the main feature I really liked, because you can't tell so much from the lighting from this. I don't know if you can, but it's actually raining today, so if I want to go somewhere and take one of my laptops with me, I can keep it in there knowing it's not going to get waterlogged. Not to mention, if you're actually more of an outdoorsy person, it'll protect you really well. And it also, speaking of laptops, has a USB charging port right here, so it makes it super convenient. It's really compact, and yet it stores a lot. I really dig it a lot. So thanks so much to them for sending that to me. As always, I'm going to leave the code DAWSOME so you can get your discount. It should be across the screen this whole time. And of course, it will be in the description and the link as well. So be sure to check out ridge.com/DAWSOME. Let's actually get started now. So the Nick era has been controversial amongst the fandom, to say the least. I think it's gotten a lot of hate. I think Nick has been used as kind of the boogeyman for a lot of Power Rangers problems. It certainly has caused a few of the issues that I think are there, but I think for the most part they're not as responsible as a lot of people happen to think. I did a video on this a while back, like why Nick isn't that bad. Mainly, I'm like 99% sure that they had nothing really to do with the maturity level of the writing and whatnot, you know, meaning like the goody-goody messages and the sort of 90s throwback feel. I think all they really had to do with it was the episode count and like the airing and whatnot, because Nick didn't, I think there's a lot of confusion that Nick doesn't own Power Rangers. I feel like people should know Saban and then Hasbro owned Power Rangers. Nick just owned the airing rights, and I'm sure they had certain input on like what is allowed and what's not, but if you watch some of Nick's other programming, there's not really anything with that level of sort of talking down to kids unless it's in the Nick Jr. block. Especially, I wanted to share one example of, you know, I used to watch more of Nick's shows a long time ago. I don't really watch so much on their lineup. I'm just kind of loosely aware of it. But a while back, I was watching a Drake and Josh rerun, and there was a rerun that came on after of I don't remember if it was Henry Danger or Danger Force. I've never really watched that show, but it was basically on for a little bit in the background before I changed the channel. And there was a plot line where one of the characters was getting made fun of for doing the right thing. They basically told on someone that had done something bad, and they were being made fun of for being a tattletale or a snitch. And that's something that definitely wouldn't happen on Power Rangers, and I just felt like that was a good example of, like, that's something that's more Nick's. I can't say that across the board, and I'm not saying they don't have stupid shows on, but to my knowledge, none of them are sort of goody-goody like PR is. So I think Nick got too often blamed for that, when I think that was just Saban's doing, honestly. Especially after we had, like, interviews come out. I think it was it Morphicon or another convention where Chip Lynn said that, yeah, it was Saban that wanted, like, the toilet humor and stuff, and the Bulk and Skull throwback. So I think that's one main thing I wanted to start off with, is I don't think Nick had anything to do with Power Rangers quote-unquote maturity level. Well, let's talk about the positives first, because I do think there was a few positives from this era. Then we'll go into negatives, and then the mixed ones are basically things that most people had a problem with that I sometimes did, but just didn't as much. So for positives, obviously it gave Power Rangers a consistent home for basically a decade, you know, somewhere for new generations of fans to find it, which is nice. And, you know, even though the promotion wasn't the best, which I'll get to in the negative aspects, Nick is a pretty prominent and well-known network, so it was a decent home for it to find some new fans. I'm kind of surprised about the amount of people saying like, oh, I grew up with Samurai, I grew up with Megaforce. So it is nice that it gave us a fairly decently placed home in terms of recognizable network and consistency. Speaking of, I think that is the other main positive, which is the consistent airing schedule. I know lots of people have problems with like the 20 episodes and the hiatus and the 2 seasons, and I'll get into all that in just a couple minutes. But I've always appreciated that we've had a consistent schedule, meaning we roughly know when Power Rangers starts and when it leaves and when it comes back. There's always a margin of error, like it's not the same week, same month every time, but like, you know, roughly around February, March it comes back, it leaves around May-ish, it comes back in the fall. You know, and I like that we knew that because over the course of this last decade, I've followed lots of other shows of a similar type, or like Marvel cartoons, or Star Wars ones, or Ben 10, and their schedules are random AF. Like, it's ridiculous. I mean, if DVRs and whatnot didn't exist in streaming services, I have no idea how kids today would keep up with TV shows. Like, it was difficult enough back in my day when you had to set the VCR and make sure it was on the right channel and make sure no one changed the channel and all that stuff. But now it's random. Like, they're like, we're coming back for 1 episode, then we're going on hiatus for 7 years, and then we're coming back for half an episode, and then we're gonna air the next 4 episodes, and then we're gonna go on hiatus for a bajillion years, and we're coming back for a 1-hour special. It's like so random. There's no rhyme or reason to most the other shows that I follow in this category, that I always liked that Power Rangers had a consistent schedule that I could follow without the aid of a DVR, so I did always appreciate that. Now, getting on to the negatives, I personally only have really 2 true negatives that I didn't like, one of which was the holiday specials. I know that that was something that Nick supposedly had a hand in, was forcing them to do the holiday specials in regards to the format. I don't know whether they forced them to be clip shows or whether that was just a Saban trying to save money, being lazy type of deal. But I just hated that. I don't hate holiday episodes, I just hated the way it was done. And again, I think I did hear that Nick was in charge of that, but I don't know how in charge they were of the regulations. I mean, for all we know, they were in charge of saying, hey, you have to have 2 holiday specials, but it was Saban that handled them the way that they did. But they were just so forced and boring. I mean, there were some fun premises with them, but they were all just these generic clip shows, and I never understood why they couldn't calibrate it and just integrate it into the show. Like, I've said this in numerous videos, even ones that have nothing to do with it. I'll be reviewing like Ben 10 and be like, Warg World was a perfect Halloween episode, but Warg World and Dino Charge was the perfect opportunity for a Halloween episode, and I don't know why they couldn't have just done stuff like that, integrate that into a Halloween episode, or have an episode where the plot doesn't have to center around the holiday and it just bookends it. I recently did a top 5 Halloween episodes, and I talked about Overdrive's episode that happened to take place during the holiday. The thing was Ronnie on Empty, and the main plot of the episode had nothing to do with Halloween, but they bookended it with the Halloween party, so you had a Halloween vibe going on. So that is one thing I've consistently disliked, and to be fair, starting around Beast Morphers and then heading into Dino Fury, they have changed it up a little bit, but for the lion's share of the time, we did have the forced holiday specials, and I never understood why they just couldn't integrate them better. And the other thing is, I think, is the lack of promotion. I think that they had a little bit more promotion going on in the early days around Early Samurai when it came back, and Nick did some of those retro marathons and stuff, kind of like Jetix old reruns, because for a small period of time, we did get reruns of older seasons that weren't Nick related. And so I think there was some decent-ish promotion going on in the very early days. After that, it was largely the bare minimum. I wouldn't say it's awful. Like, if I pop on Nicktoons on occasion, or even when I'm watching Nick for Power Rangers, I'll see a decent amount of ads when the season's happening. But for the most part, like I said, I think it's just bare minimum. And I think primarily it sucks that we never got like proper promos for like mid-season finales or when the show's coming back. So even though they have a consistent schedule, I think you build better hype and better audience when you remind people like, this is the mid-season finale, you know, make sure you stay tuned, it's coming back in the fall. And it just was bare minimum effort, and they didn't do anything like that to sort of grab you. And I think that definitely just kind of degraded as the years went on. Now let's talk about the mixed aspects. I think these are more negatives for everyone else, but more mixed for me, which is the episode count and the 2 seasons. Now the only thing I really hated, I truly hated about the 2 seasons was that they kept using the super naming. Like, on paper, I knew why they did it, because for the 2nd season with Bandai, then they could roll out a new wave of toys that seemed more exciting, but I don't understand why they had to use super every time. Like, it was almost a parody of itself. It reminded me of how every year you go onto Ranger Board when the new Sentai comes out and people are like, what is this going to be called in Power Rangers? And they'll just put like whatever the theme is, Force. It's kind of like, I don't know if it's a running joke, but it's just something that happens. Like, oh, Train Force, Ninja Force, you know, Animal Cube Force. Like, it just happens every year. That's like one of the first names people come up with. It's like taking that joke, but making it real. And every year was super. So I didn't necessarily mind them giving it a secondary title for marketing purposes, because I understood that, but I never understood why it had to be called a super season. I just didn't get that. But as far as the 20 episode go, this is why it's mixed, because to me it didn't bother me that much, because we're still getting a 40 episode series. It's just viewed differently, and for me it was just a difference in point of view. Like, people were like, I can't believe they're only giving them 20 episodes. I'm like, but they're not. They're giving them 40. They just have to air it over 2 seasons, likely due to a combination of things, but primarily I think because it's just TV works differently now. I think there's a general consistency to TV schedules, and I watched so many other shows besides PR that are on a normal schedule that this was just normal to me. A 20 episode season, the hiatus was normal to me. You know, most shows I watch, except for summer shows, go on hiatus during the summer, so that was totally normal for me. I had no problems with it. It is a little bit longer of a hiatus than some shows, but it was still a normal period of time. And I will say it is a little bit odd that it goes on hiatus between the season rather than between seasons, because most shows, when they go on hiatus for the summer, it will be between the seasons. So the finale will be in May and the season premiere will be in the fall. So it is a little bit weird, but it's also not unheard of. There's plenty of shows I watch that go on hiatus mid-season, and they'll have like season 2A, 2B, and they'll go on hiatus during the summer. So for me, this was just straight up business as usual. So like, the practice of it never bothered me. I know a lot of people disliked it, and I can see why you'd be annoyed by it, but I think people blew it out of proportion, because at the end of the day, we were still ultimately getting the same amount of episodes to tell the story, and there was also no reason for us to catch up to Sentai since there's no continuous storyline, especially since, and we're not even adapting it. And we started skipping around, so that didn't even matter. The only time that the 20 episodes and the 2 seasons really annoyed me outside of the super seasons was just when there would be a season you didn't like, you just had to spend longer in it. So like when I wasn't enjoying Ninja Steel, you had to, you know, watch it for 2 years, and just it took longer to get out of it. Same thing with the toys. Even once you got bored of it, you kind of had to sit through 2 years of the toys. Like, I really liked the Dino Charge line, but I kind of got tired of it after a while. So there was some negatives to it, but I just felt like I was never as bothered as most people, because I was more happy with the consistency and it was more of a normal schedule for me, and it didn't really matter all that much to me, but I could see why people were annoyed by it from certain respects. But that was pretty much my thoughts on the Nick era. Like, honestly, I would say that my general opinion of the whole era of where it aired on Nick was just kind of in the middle of the road. You know, there were some things I appreciated, things I didn't quite like, but it just didn't make me as angry as some people. Like, there's some people that are just truly hate this era and think that it was the bane of Power Rangers' existence, and I think they just ultimately did the bare minimum, and they did some things that Power Rangers fans aren't used to. But I am glad we're moving on, because I think there's better homes, and I think that there's better things in the future for Power Rangers, but I'm just not as mad at the Nick era as most people. But what did you guys think of Power Rangers' tenure on Nickelodeon? Let me know in the comments. As always, until next time, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you can see my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.